Pursuant to House Rule 10.01, this meeting of the Housing Finance Policy Committee will come to order. Mr. Wilcox, please take the roll.
Hausman.
Present.
Howard.
Present.
Tice, excused. Egbadje.
Present.
Bliss.
Present.
Gomez.
Present.
Hassan.
Hassan's present.
Heinrich.
Present.
Herr.
Present.
Jurgens.
Jurgens present.
Olson.
Present.
Barr.
Present.
And Ryer.
Present.
Madam Chair, we do have a quorum.
Thank you. Next order of business is approval of the minutes from Tuesday, February 23. Representative Howard, have you had a chance to review the minutes?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Representative Howard moves approval of the minutes. Any discussion? Members, then, if you would unmute yourselves for a voice vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion prevails and the minutes are approved. We have House File 835, Representative Herr here today. I think this is the governor's policy bill. There have been parts of that that have been traveling in separate bills, but his is a comprehensive one. Representative Herr, would you like to move your bill?
Yes, Madam Chair, I move that House File 835 be recommended to pass and re-referred to the Committee on Judiciary Finance and Civil Law.
To your bill.
Thank you, Chair Hausman and committee members for hearing House File 835. This is a housing policy proposal related to tenants' rights. This bill has 4 parts to it. The first is banning housing discrimination based on public assistance, which is section 1 through 3. The second is eviction expungement expanded, which is section 4 and 5. The third is pre-eviction notice required, which is section 7. And then last is that an eviction filing is not public until a judgment is rendered, which is also in section 7. Today, I'd like to focus on banning housing discrimination based on public assistance for source of income discrimination, or SOI. The other sections of the bill, as Chair Hausman already mentioned, were heard as standalone bills in House File 20 and House File 265, which were presented by Representative Hassan and heard last week in the Housing Committee. If needed, I can provide a brief overview of these sections, or I can just present the section on SOI. Madam Chair and Committee, do you have a preference?
Maybe we'll, after testimony, maybe we'll see if there are questions that members would want addressed in those sections.
Okay.
You have three testifiers. Are you ready for them?
Well, I just wanted to say a few remarks before we get into testifiers. Is that okay, Madam Chair?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. So just a little bit deeper into than just the section on banning housing discrimination based on public assistance. So section 1 through 3 makes additions to the Minnesota Human Rights Act to ban source of income discrimination in relations to housing. It specifies that potential tenants or homebuyers cannot be discriminated against based on the fact that they receive public assistance. Public assistance is defined as federal, state, or local assistance, including but not limited to rental assistance, rent supplements, or housing subsidy program. This is already in law in 17 states and over 90 localities nationwide. I wanted to just touch on a little bit today why this is important right now. So I know that we all know that in the Housing Committee, right, part of our goal is to expand access and opportunity. We must do this through production, preservation, ensuring tenants are treated fairly and with dignity, and investing in housing assistance. Housing assistance has a role in meeting this goal. So vouchers are essential and one of many tools we should be using to address our current housing affordability crisis. The committee has and will continue to discuss a broad set of tools and address changes around both the supply of and demand for housing. And we've acknowledged the importance of protecting residents from exploitation and instability. Housing assistance is a valuable tool for helping families remain stably housed and find secure, affordable housing. Critical to housing assistance is the ability to use that assistance. So the current situation that we are facing is that while the original intent of the Minnesota Human Rights Act was to include source of income protection, in practice, landlords can deny housing because of someone's source of income. Recent research by the Urban Institute, as well as others, show how many owners outright refuse to accept vouchers, which lowers rental assistance use rates. Homeline's tenant advocates often hear from tenants who have rental housing subsidies, such as Section 8 housing choice vouchers, who are unable to locate housing units where the landlord will accept the voucher. For 15 years, beginning in 1995, Homeline surveyed suburban rental housing complexes to determine where tenants with Section 8 vouchers can actually use them. The study consistently demonstrated that landlord non-acceptance of Section 8 vouchers was a significant barrier for low-income renter households finding and maintaining housing. The report indicates that when landlords are able to discriminate against renters based on the household paying all or portion of their rent via a public assistance or subsidy program, it greatly reduces access to housing and also limits their choice of neighborhoods. Other discriminatory practices in the housing market further inhibits voucher use. Research has found that households with children and those headed by Black and older adults had significantly lower odds of using their voucher despite their high level of demand for the subsidy. The unequal voucher use rates reminds us that the voucher program, absent any additional assistance, like source of income protection, does not work the same for everyone. When renters are turned away because of their subsidy, they are often forced to move to neighborhoods away from family, schools, or services, and can lose their subsidy altogether if unable to find a landlord to accept it. When families are uprooted and move voluntarily, it contributes to high student mobility rates that are detrimental to academic success. Housing instability can perpetuate declines in health, economic security, and many other social factors. So this bill provides a solution and amends the Minnesota Human Rights Act to clarify that housing discrimination based on a person's source of income is illegal. The proposal in House File 835 is best practice and common sense. As I stated earlier, and it's worth repeating, 17 states and over 90 local municipalities have SOI laws. A statewide law makes the practice uniform and easier to implement. With that, Madam Chair, I do have 3 testifiers here today to speak in favor of the bill. The first I'm sorry, Madam Chair, do you have a list of who those individuals are?
I do. Lael Robertson from Minnesota Housing is the first one that I have, and I know she's here. Ms. Robertson, welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself for the record.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Lael Robertson, and I'm the policy attorney at Minnesota Housing. I know that the committee heard testimony last week regarding the similar bills, as Representative Herr pointed out. So I'm going to focus my comments today, as Representative Herr did, on the changes to the Minnesota Human Rights Act protections regarding public assistance. Minnesota Housing's vision is that all Minnesotans live and thrive in a safe, stable home they can afford in a community of their choice. We do this in a variety of ways, including producing and preserving affordable housing, as well as providing a limited amount of rental assistance through programs such as the Housing Trust Fund and the Bridges program. But these are smaller pots of money that are targeted at identified populations, such as households experiencing long-term homelessness or people exiting institutional settings. The Federal Housing Choice Voucher Program, on the other hand, is a major source of rental assistance in Minnesota, serving over 31,000 households in 2019. The use of all of these vouchers to house Minnesota families, is vital to the stability of our state. It provides secure housing for families while infusing the state's economy with over $200 million in voucher payments to property owners. When the Housing Choice Program is not able to work as intended, allowing low-wealth families to find affordable housing in the communities of their choice, it not only destabilizes these families, it also increases the demand for state rental assistance programs and stretches an already tight state budget. I want to be clear that this policy change does not require a landlord to take an applicant because they have a voucher. It only says that a voucher holder must be considered for rental regardless of whether they will be paying a portion of their rent with the voucher. Landlords can still make rental decisions based on common industry metrics, including rental history or relevant criminal history. We know, as Representative Herr pointed out, that the inability to place vouchers is having a disparate effect on households that include Black, Indigenous, and people of color. In 2019, Minneapolis Public Housing Authority reported that 94% of their vouchers went to households of color. Metro HRA, who you'll hear from later today, this morning, has reported that as of this month, approximately 70% of their vouchers are held by households of color. The inability to place vouchers also affects families. In 2017, the Center on Budget and Policy Priority reported that 77% of Minnesota's vouchers were going to families with children, estimating that over 42,000 children had the potential to be supported by this federal resource. I want to conclude by saying that I had the honor of sitting on the governor's task force on housing 2 years ago with Chair Hausman. Task force members heard from housing experts, people with lived experience, and service providers, voices you'll hear from today as well, that there is a crisis of housing affordability and a crisis of housing accessibility. Minnesota Housing has taken this as a call to action, understanding that we must take steps to remove barriers to safe and suitable housing for Minnesotans, allowing voucher holders to use their vouchers to have stable homes for their children, affordable rent, and versatility to choose where they want to live is one way that the state can, as Commissioner Ho says, go big so everyone can go home. I'm happy to take questions about the contents of the bill as well, but I'll pass it to the next testifier. Thank you.
We'll have the three testifiers and then we'll pause for questions. We have Terry Smith from the Metro Housing and Redevelopment Authority. Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, my name is Terry Smith. I'm the Director of the Metropolitan Council Housing and Redevelopment Authority. And I'm here today to share a little bit of perspective with you on the difficulties families with vouchers have in terms of placing their voucher. I'm going to try to share my screen. I have a short PowerPoint for you today, so let's see if this works. Can you see my screen, Madam Chair?
No, it's not coming up. We can just see your face. And if we were in the hearing room, I could have a staff person come over and help you with your technical issue, which we often did.
Madam Chair, I can share my screen for Ms. Smith, and if she wants to just tell me when to move to the next slide, that would be fine.
Oh, okay. All right. Did you hear that? There we
Would
go.
be great.
And then just let them know when you need to.
Thank you, Owen. Okay, there we go.
Okay.
Again, thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, good morning. Again, my name is Terry Smith. I'm the Director of the Metropolitan Council Housing and Redevelopment Authority, and I'm here today to share some perspective on how difficult it is with families trying to place their housing choice voucher. Next slide, please. So in order to set the context for you, most of you know the Housing Choice Voucher Program provides federal rent assistance that helps 2.2 million Americans and low-income households afford rent on the private rental market. 32,000 of these families and households live in the state of Minnesota or are served through our state, and nearly 7,000 of these families are served by Metro HRA. Half of those families are families with children. Getting on a waiting list and getting a voucher is incredibly challenging. Waiting lists here in Minnesota and across the nation are long and they're closed. For example, the Metro HRA, in coordination with the two other largest Section 8 administrators in the state of Minnesota, St. Paul Public Housing and Minneapolis Public Housing, collectively opened their waiting list together in 2019. Collectively, we received 45,000 applications for the Section 8 program. Our goal is to have about a 2 to 3 year wait as applicants wait for a voucher. With that in mind, 7,000 households were randomly placed on the 3 waiting lists together. You can do the math, but that means 38,000 families and households did not even get put on a waiting list. So getting on a waiting list is a first obstacle. Finding a place to use the voucher is even a more difficult hurdle. Next slide, please. Waiting times on waiting lists vary, but typically a household waits 2 to 5 years, sometimes longer, for their name to come to the top of the list. Once a household comes to the top of the waiting list and is determined eligible, the family is charged with finding a rental unit on the open rental market, renting from a private landlord. Many factors influence whether a family is successful in placing their voucher. Some of these are shown on the slide here. Rents and vacancy rates are a factor. Vacancy rates in the Twin Cities, frankly, all of Minnesota, have been extremely low since 2011. When vacancy rates are low, rents go up, and in many cases, much higher than the program limits allow. Landlord participation is voluntary, so landlords can choose whether or not they want to accept a voucher. When vacancy rates are low, landlords may have 15 tenants to choose from for one rental unit, so they get much more selective and more strict with their screening criteria, making it more difficult for families with vouchers to place those vouchers. In a low vacancy market, where landlords have lots of options, the tenant's rental and credit history impacts the success in placing their voucher. A landlord that may have accepted a tenant in the past that may have an eviction on their record is less likely to accept that same tenant in today's market conditions. And lastly, housing search times are a factor. Housing authorities across the country have discretion on how much time they give voucher holders to find a rental unit. Typical search times are anywhere between 60 and 120 days. During the period of COVID, this issue has become exacerbated, and Metro HRA has increased shopping time for voucher holders to 180 days or 6 months. Next slide.
And are you saying when you get to the end of that, if they haven't found an apartment in that search time, then they lose their voucher?
Madam Chair, that's exactly correct. And this slide will talk about that and get at that exact issue, Madam Chair. This slide shows the success rates of Metro HRA voucher holders. So these are households coming off the waiting list for the first time and issued a voucher. Prior to 2011, when the vacancy rates dipped to extremely low levels, it was pretty typical for about 80% of families that were issued vouchers were able to use them. You can see how the success rates have dipped over the years. During 2014, Metro HRA success rate dropped to 45%. During this period, our waiting list was 7 years old, which impacts the success of families on the waiting list. The reality is families that are waiting that long for a voucher are forced to find other options. This was also the year coming out of sequestration. Since then, we've had success rates in the 60% ranges due to the continued low vacancy, skyrocketing rents, and decreased landlord participation. Success rates across the state, my colleague Jill Keppers will talk next about Duluth's perspective, but success rates across the state range anywhere from 35% to about 60% success. This slide overall is a good reminder that families were extremely lucky to have even gotten on the waiting list. They may have waited 2 to 5 years and sometimes longer to even get a voucher, and now have a steep challenge in finding a rental unit where a landlord is willing to participate in the program. I often struggle with what's more effective, using carrots and incentives for landlords to take vouchers or sticks, and we currently have very few of both. In recent years, Metro HRA has developed a variety of sort of carrot strategies to recruit landlords, including financial incentives, dedicating a program liaison to foster tenant-landlord relationships, active landlord recruitment, attending workshops and events, talking to landlords about the voucher program, among others. And with all these strategies in place, about 40% of our vouchers come back to us unused. Legislation that does not allow landlords to blanketly say no to voucher holders would be incredibly helpful to the families that we serve. Next slide, please. This slide is looking at all housing choice voucher holders who've been housed in a given year and went off the program because their voucher expired. Pretty typically, this means they have given notice to move, or their landlord has given them notice to move. As a result, they are issued a voucher to find a new place to live, and their voucher expired before they successfully placed it. The Metro HRA again has about 6,800 voucher holders served with rental assistance. In a given year, about 11% or 750 vouchers turn over. Of those, for example, in 2016, 9% were due to expired vouchers. Going along the continuum from 2016 to 2020, you'll see there's a steady increase of expiring vouchers. In 2020, the percentage of voucher holders turning over due to expiring vouchers rose to 22%. This is not perfect, but it gives an idea of family success in placing vouchers. To give you an example, if a family purchases a home and no longer needs a voucher, this would generally be categorized as a voluntary drop. But in some cases, the family may just still purchase a home, but then just let their voucher expire. And they may not contact the Metro HRA to let them know why they're dropping their voucher. They may just let it expire, and we may not know, the actual reason why. So it's not perfect, but it gives you an idea of the increased difficulty families have in placing their vouchers. And with that, Madam Chair, my formal comments are complete.
Thank you very much. We'll come back to questions after the third testifier. Jill Keppers from the Duluth Housing and Redevelopment Authority. Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself for the record.
Chair Hausman and committee members. My name is Jill.
And I guess, Mr. Worth, do you want to take down we've got the next one up.
Thank you, Madam Chair Hausman and all committee members. My name is Jill Keppers. I'm the Executive Director of the Duluth Housing and Redevelopment Authority. And my role here today is just to let the committee members know that this is not just a Metro issue, that this impacts the entire state. So we have 2 slides that we added. Terry was gracious enough for me to just add a couple of slides to our presentation to show you what things are looking like in Duluth currently. So Duluth has about 1,550 rent subsidy vouchers. And over the last 4 years, you can see the drop in success rate. Currently, from the time a person is issued a voucher to lease up, only about 43% or less than half are able to find a place to live. We've done things like increase the payment standard that's allowed by HUD. We've met with groups in town, landlord groups, to try to encourage participation. There's just such a low vacancy rate in Duluth at 2.6%, and lots of new development happening that rents are higher than people can afford, and that our payment standards allow. I put an example here of the 2-bedroom. The max payment standard for a 2-bedroom unit in Duluth is $950, and we are at that max. But the average rent for a 2-bedroom in Duluth is $1,200. So there just is this gap that we try to overcome with a variety of means. Next slide, please. So things we have done, we attend landlord association meetings regularly to do education and answer questions. We've increased our payment standards to the maximum limits. We actually fund an organization here in town called the Tenant Landlord Connection, or a co-funder, one of 3, the county, the city, and the HRA, to actually fund education and mediation services offered free to landlords and tenants. We created a team here in Duluth that consists of the HRA, the rent subsidy supervisor at the HRA, the Tenant Landlord Connection representative, an education and counseling director at a local nonprofit, and even the city of Duluth's economic developer, who's part of the housing team in Duluth, to brainstorm ways and implement ways to increase landlord participation. We've created a newsletter that goes out to local landlords, providing information about housing choice voucher programs, about information and success stories from landlords. This bill, as was mentioned earlier, is really important to prevent that discrimination, to give us one more tool for these families to find housing. Oftentimes it's quiet, it's not out there, but every once in a while you'll actually hear landlords that just say, I don't take Section 8. And I can use an example from a neighboring housing authority in the Cloquet Carlton area. They recently had a landlord that has over 100 units that is bowing out of the Section 8 program. They're just saying, I am no longer going to take Section 8. And when asked why, there's no real reason. Sometimes you hear, oh, there's a lot of requirements, but there's not. Our HQS standards are actually lower than getting your rental license standards. And they say, oh, I've heard a tenant is a problem. Well, there's going to be difficult tenants in market rate units. To overcome that, to have any option of giving our tenants an extra hand to help find a place to live, so important. In Duluth, the average income of a family that receives a housing choice voucher is less than $15,000 a year. that voucher, I've had an employee say that voucher is like gold. And the fact that over half of them have to return that gold back to the pot it's a shame. It's a shame. That voucher can be used across the nation, and to have them have to turn it back is just beyond comprehension. In Duluth, a little bit more about disparate impact, as one of the presenters mentioned earlier. In Duluth, our population is about 10.2% people of color, but our Housing and Redevelopment Authority, 30% of the people we serve are people of color. So 3 times the amount of our general population is represented here in our clientele. That is really what I wanted to say today, and I appreciate you giving me the time, and I really appreciate the committee taking up this bill and really looking at a way to just add another tool to the toolbox for these low-income families to really try to find a way to use that gold and get that voucher placed in service. Thank you very much today.
And the lack of those, my most recent experience was a mother of a child who was doing so well in the Roseville school system. But the mother was being evicted because of, I think, a sign she had put in her window. And so she so wanted to keep her child in the Roseville school system where there was such success. But there was not one other apartment where she could use her voucher. So I'm assuming she had to move to another district. So we have, we're going to pause here for questions of these 3 testifiers. Mr. Worth, do we have questions of these first 3 testifiers?
Yes, Madam Chair. Representative Bliss has a question.
Representative Bliss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my first question was if you put additional restrictions on the renters, and you indicate you do in the rental units, the landlords, even though in your opinion they're I think you said minimal or not much. Is it my understanding that if I invest in rental properties, if I'm getting close to retirement, I got a little bit of gray on the whiskers here, and I may be looking to invest in some rental homes as a retirement income. I've worked my entire life to build this nest egg I've got. And if I choose to invest in a business, are you telling me that I cannot choose my form? I have to take somebody with a Section 8 voucher, even though maybe I think that my rental unit might be a little bit more worth more than what is charged or what is reimbursed?
I heard one of the testifiers speak directly to that. Who wants to take that?
I can take a first stab at it.
Ms. Smith.
Madam Chair and Representative Bliss, it's not a blanket requirement that you must take a voucher holder. It's more the opposite, that a landlord would not be able to blanket say no Section 8. Landlords would still be able to screen tenants as they do, non-Section 8 tenants, and have the same policies and resident selection criteria in place. It would just give tenants an opportunity to at least have landlords look at their application and consider them like market rate tenants. And Lael may want to add to that.
Ms. Robertson?
Thank you, Chair Huffman and Representative Bliss. The other thing to be aware of is that this doesn't limit rental amounts. It's not going to put a restriction on how much you charge for your rent. So a voucher holder is only able to place their voucher at a rental unit that is within the fair market rents and within rent reasonableness. And so if your apartment by comparables is above the FMR, the payment standard of the voucher, you're not expected to drop your rent in order to allow it for a voucher. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
Representative Bliss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My second question is, if there are additional restrictions, whether or not they're prohibitive in your opinion or not, my experience with dealing with government agencies is once you let them into the door, they tend to try to take a little bit more control. And I personally would be leery of accepting public subsidies. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. I don't know. I haven't taken that step yet. I'd have to evaluate it. But I guess you said you tried the carrot approach. before and it's not working. So now you're getting a big stick out of the toolbox. And I want to know how this is going to incentivize more people getting into the rental business and providing more subsidies, more houses, more rental units. How is this stick going to encourage more people getting into the business?
Who wants to take that one?
Madam Chair, before I let my testifiers answer that, I do just want to say,
Representative Her.
thank you, Madam Chair, and Representative Bliss. I think that, and I'll speak to a little bit just on the comment you made about, whether you be willing to or not. I'm not sure. I think that goes to part of the issue we're trying to solve, right? There are perceptions of who we think holds a Section 8 voucher and what that person is going to be like. And that is the problem, is that people are basing that on the perception of what they think that renter will be like. And I just want to reiterate that there are good landlords and there are bad landlords. There are good tenants and bad tenants, regardless of how they're used, the source of income they use to pay for it, for their rent. And so I think that is part of the reason why, is that we're not asking for landlords to adjust the way they do any of their rental. We're asking them to not just simply deny somebody because they pay with a rent voucher, just as we ask landlords now not to deny them just because they are Black or because they are Asian. It is the exact same thing as the perceptions that come with those. And so with that, I will just ask one of my testifiers to answer this specific.
Madam Chair, if I may respond to that.
You want to clarify that?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I am not saying that, and I don't know where you heard that in my statement, that I would not accept Section 8 or government assistance housing because of the people associated with it. My concern is letting the government pay, and then just like they do with our schools, when they accept public funding to the schools, and the government can go in there and start dictating what they can and can't do, and which is exactly what I'm saying with the additional restrictions you put on rental units. And again, in your opinion, they're minor and they're limited, but me as a private citizen investing my sweat and blood into a business, I am very leery of letting the government tell me exactly what I can and can't do with this business. So that's my point, not the people. And I don't know if I've made this clear. I came from a very, very poor family. I myself was homeless prior to going into the Navy. I know there are good people in this situation. My problem is letting the government in the door, not the people, the government.
And I think Ms. Smith had a comment too.
Yes, Madam Chair and Representative Bliss, as a administrator of the Section 8 program, what we do is we encourage landlords, all of our landlords. We have about 2,000 private landlords that we work with, and we encourage landlords to treat Section 8 tenants like they would any market rate tenant. You can determine the terms of your lease, which would be the same as any market rent tenant. We encourage you to force your lease as you would with any market rate tenant. We want you to charge the same rent that you do any non-assisted tenant. And so the rules are the same. And so the only difference is that this family would be paying with a federal housing voucher, where other non-assisted families would be paying with their own income. And so, to take it one step further, housing authorities, if there is a lease violation, for example, the housing authority can step in and help with that, because if a family is in violation of the programs of the rules or the rules of the program, and one is lease compliance, then the housing authority can step in and assist with that.
Any further follow-up, Representative Bliss?
No, thank you.
Mr. Worth, more questions?
Madam Chair, next on the list is Representative Heinrich.
Representative Heinrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question's for Ms. Robertson.
Okay.
If she's on. I'm interested in figuring out how this would work in the instance of, say you have the example that was used of 15 different applications, and let's say one of them included public assistance program participation, and that person does not get chosen. Would they have, so they would have legal recourse if they felt like that they were discriminated upon because they were intending to use a Section 8 voucher, for example? Would that be put in a court of law essentially at the same level as the same type of discrimination against race, creed, color, religion? Is that what this bill does?
Ms. Robertson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Representative Heinrich. I think first I want to address the premise, which is if you have 15 people who are applying at the same time, there's nothing illegal about taking them as a first come, first serve. And as they apply to you, looking at them, at their qualifications, going through all of the things that you would do as a normal landlord to see if they qualify. So starting from the only thing that we would ask you to do is look at all 15 of those in that same order, in that way, and just put the Section 8 aside. So if the first one comes to you and they don't have a Section 8 voucher and they qualify, then you can go ahead and rent to that person. If they don't, and the second person does have a voucher and they qualify in every way and they have a voucher, then you have to give it to them because they qualify just like anybody else. To your second part, which is how would you be able to enforce this? Under the Minnesota Human Rights Act, you have a couple of different ways to enforce it. The first is through an administrative process by filing a complaint with the Human Rights Department. And the second is you can file a private civil action in a court of law, and it would be in the same way that you would file any other protected class.
Representative Heinrich.
Thank you for that answer, Ms. Robertson. I appreciate that. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, Mr. Worth, anyone else?
Yes, Madam Chair. Last question is Representative Hassan.
Representative Hassan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My comments have been addressed, so I'll just pass. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So now we had questions for these testifiers. We have one additional testifier, Kyle Burnt from Minnesota Multi-Housing. Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Kyle Burnt. I am the Director of Public Policy with the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association, known as MHA. I appreciate the opportunity to raise our concerns on House File 835. MHA has previously in committee raised our concerns on the 14-day notice and the expungement sections contained in this proposal. Seeing we have raised those concerns in the past, I will keep my testimony to the new provisions under sections 1 through 3. These sections would create an obligation for an owner and operator of rental property to engage with all level of government assistance programs. Government assistance programs have significant costs and due diligence required and were designed as voluntary programs. This proposal would create an obligation of all landlords to sign contracts with government entities to engage in these programs, follow extensive rules no matter the extent of the program burdens, and further train staff on the program obligations. This also would allow all levels of government to create mandatory assistance programs. This is concerning because this proposal does not take into account what these programs could look like. For example, in Oregon, there's a COVID rental assistance program that is an optional program for landlords to participate in. The program provides that landlords must forgive 20% of the rent to accept 80% payment from the state. If these policies were implemented in Minnesota, it could mean landlords are forced to forgive rents, otherwise they could face charges of discrimination. For these reasons, we oppose this proposal. I appreciate the opportunity to raise our concerns on House File 835. Thank you, Madam Chair and members.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Worth, do we have questions for Mr. Burnt?
Madam Chair, no questions at this time.
So Representative Herr, final comments from you about the bill or?
Thank you, Chair Hausman. I just wanted to address really quickly that the administrative requirements for accepting a voucher is actually only 2 steps. One is that the landlord must complete 2 additional pieces of paper, the tenancy addendum and the housing assistance payment contract with the voucher administrator, and 2, to comply with inspection. That HUD requires that the housing quality standard inspection be completed within 15 days of a tenant's request approval. And so there's not an overburden amount of work that landlords would have to engage in order to accept a Section 8 voucher. So I just wanted to make that really clear, and that there, again, just to reiterate that landlords are not asked to provide any additional processes to accommodate vouchers, that what we're asking for is to simply not deny them because they have rent vouchers. And to be clear, there are common practices in which landlords will actually put signs that say no Section 8. That would become prohibited. And so it's really to address the most serious cases in which discrimination is occurring. And with that, Madam Chair and Committee, in closing, it is important for us to remember that we lack a diverse set of housing policy tools at the scale to address our complex housing problems. And as a result, those with the lowest incomes in our state have consistently suffered. Vouchers are an essential part of our diverse set of tools. We must ensure that people with access to these scarce resources can actually benefit from the stability they provide. So House File 835 gives rental assistance recipients a fair shake at rental options, allowing for more geographic choices, better access to decent, safe housing, and further stability once they're adequately housed. As such, Madam Chair, I renew my motion that House File 835 be recommended to pass and re-referred to the Committee on Judiciary, Finance, and Civil Law.
And I'll just check once more just to make sure, Mr. Worth, or were there any other questions of the author?
Madam Chair, no questions at this time.
Okay, so Representative Herr renews her motion that House File 835 be recommended to pass and be re-referred to the Committee on Judiciary, Finance, and Civil Law. Mr. Wilcox, please take the roll.
Hausman,
Aye.
Howard,
Aye.
Tice excused, Agbadje,
Aye.
Bliss,
No.
Gomez,
Aye.
Hassan,
Aye.
Heinrich,
No.
Herr,
Aye.
Jurgens,
No.
Olson,
Aye.
Barr,
No.
and Ryer.
Aye.
Madam Chair, that is 8 ayes, 4 nays, and 1 excused.
There being 8 ayes and 4 nays, the motion prevails. The bill is referred. Members, we did have an additional bill on the agenda for today. And at the last minute, there was a need for a delete all for some language change, and that process just didn't quite make it in time for us to post it in time for others who might want to reference it. So we'll be taking that up at another time. But as a result, you have some extra time for your lunch today because we had just the one bill. The next meeting of the Housing, Finance, and Policy Committee will be on Tuesday, March 2nd at 10:30 a.m. There being no other business before us, we are adjourned.